food initiatives through the city for the last few years. It's worked quite well. John does a lot of work with the social agencies, so Food Share and Homes and Fishes, food banks, and so on, whereas I'm more on the land use side of things. So it's been quite a nice marriage of the two. But I noticed going home to my husband and telling him stories at the end of the day, he kind of zones out on me. So I'll try to turn it rather than focusing on all the specific regulations. So what is urban agriculture? So first of all, does anybody here have chickens? On farms in the city, who's got them where? Farm? Twice. Well, let me tell you a couple of stories about some chickens that we. First of all, we have to protect their privacy, so these aren't the real chickens.
Change their names.
Change their names, yeah. So I was introduced to this gentleman a few years ago who told me about his attempts to raise urban chickens. So this is pre-permitted use in the city. He went to all of his neighbors and said, "Are you okay if I do this?" Never had any issues with it. So he comes home with 4 chickens, 4 little chickens, spent the first 3 weeks of their life in the bathtub. Outside they go. A few weeks later, all of a sudden you can hear this rooster crowing through the neighborhood. Oh no. So Sally became Mustang Sally, and went back to the farm that she came from in the first place, and was quite happy to live in a farm out in the trees on 100+ acres. A few weeks later, next chicken, you hear her all over the neighborhood. She is an opera singer. So back to the farm. And then the last 2 chickens ended up eating their eggs. So there's no more egg production. There's nothing. So they go to another retirement home for chickens that's out in landfill. And that's the end of the chicken escapade. So bad ending for the person who bought the chickens, but a good ending for the chickens. And the neighbors were all actually quite upset because now they no longer have these chickens clucking in the backyard. It was actually quite enjoyable for them. This is Matilda. Matilda lives in North Nanaimo on a large lot. Another couple who they're raising chickens in their backyard. Matilda had a really scary experience not that long ago. They're out being fed, and an eagle swoops in, grabs Matilda, off they go. Interestingly enough, while the couple who have the chickens are feeding their chickens, the crows are also getting into this. So the crows chase the eagle, eagle drops the chicken, the crows herd Matilda back to her house. They have this whole little cycle going on. So that's something that you wouldn't have seen a few years ago because we didn't allow it. So Nanaimo's got quite an interesting history for food. It started off as a coal mining town. As part of that, particularly the south part of town was actually subdivided into 5-acre lots for the people who were working in the coal mines so that they could provide their own farming, their own self-sufficiency. As we've become more and more urbanized, obviously that's changed. There are not a lot of farming activities in the city anymore. So that's becoming more and more of an issue for people, and as we're all standing here today, we know that people are wanting to go more and more back to those kinds of activities. So in 2006, we started to go through a review of our official community plan, and for the first time, we were hearing back from the community to say, you don't have anything to protect our food resources. What can we do about that? So in 2008, when we adopted our community plan, we actually now have a section in there that talks about food security. And one of the things we're going to talk about here today is the food strategy that we are now working on as a result of bringing this policy back. 2010, our licensing control bylaw started to change for animals, so we now bring the poultry into the city, and we have bees in the city. We'll talk about that a little bit more. 2011, we updated our zoning bylaw, so it now allows for commercial production within the city on urban food gardens. And then 2012, the Health Authority actually gave a grant to the city so we could start working on that food strategy. So the food strategy itself has been underway for a year or so now. We'll actually be taking it forward to council in November. We started off last spring, going out to the community, holding some workshops to say, what's important for you? What makes Nanaimo unique in terms of its food culture? Again, we have limited resources to pull this off in terms of staff, in terms of budget, and so on. So rather than starting off with a comprehensive review, we literally tried to focus the conversation on some key pieces. And interestingly enough, through those workshops, we found out that's exactly what people were concerned about. So it really gave us some good direction as to how to move forward then with the content of the food strategy. And you can see here we've got really the 7 key directions that were most important for people. One of the main things that came through all of the conversations was the education piece. And whether that was to know where to go to get your food, how to grow food, how to cook food, where those resources are, it filtered through all of those other areas that we're focusing on as part of that strategy. End result, when we go to council in November, we're probably looking at a fairly short document that's got some general policy in it with a fairly lengthy implementation list. This isn't a document that we want to finish off and put on a shelf. It's something that we want to be living and breathing and continue to move forward so that we can continue to build on those and bring the community together to make it more self-sustaining than what we currently have. Other key pieces that we're working on, poultry. A few years ago, we got a number of complaints from the Old City area, which is 3 blocks away from the downtown. Somebody has a goat, and the smell is a problem. It wasn't even so much the noise, but the smell of this goat was a problem. Our bylaws say no animals. So battle went on for a few months, and finally the goat had to go. We took it home, but he had to go. So as a result of that, council came back to staff and said, tell us what this looks like. How do we manage urban farm animals? So that project literally got split into 2, said we'll deal with the farm animals later, but what can we do to work with the community? We had a lot of people coming forward saying we want our chickens back, we want to bring them back into the city. So that was the first piece that we focused on. That was initiated in 2010 as a test period for a year to see how well it would work. It allowed for 4 chickens or ducks, either one. And it went remarkably well. We had very few complaints. So in 2011, a year later, we came back and upped it to 6. Now there are, I won't go into it all because people are selling it already. But literally there's a serious condition, so no roosters. That was what caused the problems in the first place. How do you keep your structures, making sure that it's clean, making sure that there's no nuisance issues. Manure, big issue, make sure that you're keeping it clean. And don't bring them into the house, so no bathtub raising. And essentially, it's worked really, really well. We've had very few complaints. So as you can see, 1874, when the city was incorporated, there were no restrictions on anything. You could have farm animals, you could have chickens, you could have ducks. Essentially, what happened is post-war, and as Rob mentioned, when we start to separate our uses over time, you start getting more and more complaints. People don't want to have that right next door to their single-family dwelling anymore. The most complaints that we got were the roosters. So in 1995, our licensing bylaw comes in that says no poultry. And again, fast forward to 2010, we allowed the 4. Fast forward to 2011, we're up to 6. Seriously, hardly any complaints. And just as a comparison, in 2012, we had 21 complaints about chickens. Half of those were about roosters. So there's one problem that the municipality has to deal with. We can allow the poultry, but there's a fairly high error rate when you go out to pick up your baby chicks that you're going to end up with the roosters. What do you do with them? So that's something that we haven't quite figured out yet. Another 25% of the complaints were about free-range chickens. So all of a sudden they're walking down the city streets. They're not on their property anymore. Personally, we kind of can have a good conversation with them as they want to work, but people don't feel that way. In comparison, the same year, 2012, we handed out 175 tickets for complaints about dogs. That's just the tickets, which means that there were over 1,000 complaints about dogs in the city. So that compares to 21 complaints about poultry. That's a pretty good margin for us to proceed with other activities. Beekeeping. This one's been very benign. Again, this has been going on since back to the incorporation of the city. In 1995, it got regulated somewhat and now controls no more than 3 hives per acre. So anybody in the city can have 3 hives in their backyard. We have no idea how many are out there, none. But what we do know is that we also have hardly any complaints on them. From 1998 to now, there's been 12 complaints about bees. 3 of those came from the same woman. Her son's allergic to bees. And so the next door neighbor very graciously picked up his hives and moved it to the other side of the yard, so it's not a problem anymore. 4 of the other complaints were about general swarming in the city. There's not much we can do about going out and taking the swarm of bees that are working their way through the community, but essentially we have no complaints about them whatsoever. Bylaw enforcement have advised us that, again, we don't know where the hives are, but a lot of the hives that are happening in the community, you might have them stored at home, but they tend to take them out into the regional district and out into the woods so that they can actually be feeding off the wildflowers in that area. Urban agriculture. Now this is an interesting one. This is new for us. In 2011, when the zoning bylaw was updated, we actually allowed for people to use their facilities, their yards for urban food production. There's nothing to stop you right now. You could literally use every square inch of your yard to grow food. There's nothing to stop you from doing that. These regulations actually said, but we're going to do a test run again. How about using some of that property for commercial uses? So now you're still growing, you can still use the whole thing, but only a certain amount can you use for actual commercial operations. And in this instance, we're looking at about 600 square meters on a smaller lot. It can go a little bit higher than that if you cover larger parts. Again, it's that test piece to find out how it works within the neighborhoods that we have. Fast forward to a year and a half later. Sure.
You have pesticide restrictions.
Somewhat.
Not complete.
Not complete, no. Commercial operators are a little bit different than the household operations. Household operations, we can say no pesticides in the city. So this is just saying that if you're going to run an urban food garden, commercial operations, no pesticides. You cannot use pesticides. A year and a half later, we're not aware of any activity in the city. So it's an interesting balance between hearing what the community is saying and looking around at all the people here who are concerned about food production and building that self-sufficiency and how many people are actually taking up those opportunities. So as far as we know, there's one roadside stand in the city, and it's actually linked with one of the food organizations in town. So again, is it an education piece, or is it that interest piece that nobody is yet willing to take up those opportunities?
Can I just insert something there?
Sure.
The dissonance between the amount of activity, the input, the able to be all this excitement and energy, and then not seeing roadside stands. Roadside stands are very visible, they're very high for sale, pieces for sale, things for sale. But we know dozens and dozens of pieces we're doing this, including people who are selling currently at farmers markets. They use it in the roadside stand. This particularly happened in Lansdale after we came under top 3 years ago. All the sites, flowers, pies, all the sites in Lansdale came down overnight because most people just want to be tapped. Having said that, they keep the free sales to their ongoing customers. And I can show you right now on Craigslist, people who are even in growing Nanaimo, as a food grow area, who are selling plants, eggs, garlic, etc.
See, that's good information because we have no way of tracking that.
Call me.
So, the positive thing of that is that if there is activity going on out there, we're not receiving the complaints about it.
Right. So you guys, you folks did an amazing job and to facilitate and and at least decriminalize this activity, to make it some time for these people to come out of the closet.
So essentially, as I mentioned earlier, we have this food strategy going forward. So we continue to work on those pieces of what we hear from the community and what do we take forward from there. So the food strategy, general policy. We've been working on the poultry, no issues. The bees, no issues. The other side of the equation, through processing and distribution and waste management and so on. Last year, $78,000 the city granted to buy a refrigerated truck that now picks up produce from the various grocery stores, and farms, etc., takes them to the Wilson Witches Food Bank. Some of the other organizations in town are also receiving those materials. We did a project a couple of years ago where we set up satellite offices through some of the other churches in town, for example. So instead of one location now for the food bank, it's actually spread throughout the city so people have easier access to those foods.
And then another piece we did is we started buying farmers to provide that food stuff to the food bank. We gave them money to purchase from local farmers. So we wanted the food security sector to tap into local food production and sort of have a virtuous circle where we're purchasing food from local growers, and that's going to local citizens who don't have the money to buy their own food. So that's still in its infancy. It's hard to do that in the winter months, of course, because there's not that variety of things. And secondly, we found that when you provide local foods to hungry families, they often don't know what to do with products like kale or naturally grown products from around here. So there was a bit of a barrier around people's ability to cook and prepare that sort of food, but we have community kitchens working on that and training people up. But nonetheless, that's a big piece of what we see going forward is purchasing food, sustaining local farmers, and using that to provide for needy families.
Can I just follow on that? Is that the municipality that's purchasing the food?
We're giving the food to the local nonprofits with the mandate to go purchase local food with it. So they're actually going to the farms and buying the food that they would provide to their, but we give them the money to do so.
The municipality does that?
Yes. Yeah, not every year, but we do every, as often as we can, we provide grants to the food banks and to the hot meal programs, and we say, go buy eggs from the local egg farmers and go buy food from the local farmers.
Just to follow a little bit more, do those bodies apply for those grants from you? Or
Well, we work in partnership, and we sort of figure out what we want them to.
That's very information.
Want me to repeat it all over there?
Continue your conversation over there. If you're
Did I hear you make sense, city being $58,000 to buy a tractor?
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, because food security is, so the food bank said to us, we want to go and collect food from the grocery stores, because they throw out a lot of food every day, right? We all know that. But they won't give it to us unless we can prove that there's a cold chain. In other words, if there's a risk that the grocery store will be sued by some salmonella or whatever that might arise, you have to be able to demonstrate that you've had a complete chain of cold storage for that food. So the food bank said if we had this fancy $80,000 reefer truck, we could go to the grocery stores and pick up the excess food and then be absolved of liability, and then we could distribute that food to needy families and to food programs. So all we lack, they said, is one of these expensive reefer trucks. So they said, well, we'll purchase one of those for you, and then you can drive around and pick up food from the grocery stores and then distribute it to the food bank. And the outcome is, we met with them last week to find out how it's going. The outcome is that they have more food than they know what to do with. In other words, even with the food banks and the breakfast programs and the Salvation Army meals, they still have more food than they can actually distribute to needy people. So for the first time, they're in surplus with excess food, and they don't even know what to do with it anymore, because so it's quite successful.
Wow.
Yes, if there was a processing facility, because a lot of it's spoilage, the high spoilage rate, you get yogurt that's got 2 days left in its life cycle, that sort of thing. So what they've done has really been delivery just in time. So they're taking food directly from the grocery store, bringing it directly to the food programs, and they're giving it out that day or the next morning. So it's a really sort of just-in-time delivery system, so there's no storage of this food. It comes out of the grocery stores
into the consumer's hands within 24 hours. So that's really been successful.
Great model.
In that way, so,
Would it be?
yeah.
The thing about that that's so important is that there's huge latent capacity in the community. You've got the organization distributing, we have farmers markets with leftovers, we have, and a whole bunch of gleaning opportunities, but the infrastructure is such a vital piece, and a lot of the community organizations can't access that. And something like a one-time grant, it's like, creates, it unleashes this potential. Do you guys have it written on a website somewhere so I can send it around to the council?
Well, I can show you, I can send you the picture of the truck, that's all we have.
Okay.
But once, I
Send it to
would,
me too, please.
yeah, I would comment that why we did this was the feedback from the users was if you are a homeless individual going to the Salvation Army was, we get donuts and we get more donuts and we get more bread. We are so sick of the crappy food that we get that we're getting sick from the free food because it's all sugar based, right? And flour based. And that was the traditional thing. Yeah, we have some extra donuts. Let's give it to the Salvation Army. Well, the guys are going, please, I want some fresh food. I can't live on donuts. So it was really driven by the user group saying we want fresh local food, which is quite interesting. These aren't high-end consumers. These are folks who are, going to food banks and going to the Salvation Army. They're saying, give us something local and fresh because our bodies need that to survive on the streets. So that was what drove it, was the whole notion that we can no longer feed donuts to the homeless. They just can't live on that, right?
I would just I'd like the information on when you did it and how much it cost and who pursued the initiative. Can we get that?
Absolutely. And I'll just give you the Coles Notes version, which is it cost about $100,000 to buy a reefer truck. We got one for $80,000 for the good
But
services.
your council must have passed it.
Absolutely. It was some convincing, yes.
Wasn't the secret budget?
No, it was a secret, yeah, the gambling budget. I took the money out of the casino, so no one objects, right? So if you have a casino in your town? But a one-time investment of $80,000 yielded an enormous
Well, not
exponential
just
growth.
for the homeless or the hungry, but for the farmers
Yeah.
and the grocery stores.
Yeah, but the key piece out of that, this is one of our main success stories, but I think it comes back to building those relationships because we were working with some of the local organizations and we knew what we needed, we knew what we needed to pursue and how we could potentially help them with organizations or 2 or 3 individuals getting together and coming forward and letting us know what kinds of things they're looking for. Like the chickens, that resulted from about 4 people going forward to council and saying, we want to do this, help us to try and put this into place.
Give us chicken.
Yes.
Yeah, so, it really comes down to the community and having a voice and coming forward and working with staff to be able to put some of these things together. So it's all about those relationships.
Very impressive.
Well, and just to build on that, in the some 200 odd articles that I've read over the last year, it is widespread. Australia, Europe, North America. The whole food security and local food initiative has been driven by the grassroots. We're just catching up to that. Exactly. So there is profound power in that.
Yeah.
That's we're catching up to it.
Yeah, and not anybody not necessarily everybody who's working in local government still has a good feel on what's coming forward. So it really is the community coming forward and pushing to be able to do it. We're very lucky right now that we have a council who's really supportive of
Are you
local
ever?
initiatives.
Yeah.
You are indeed.
Yeah, I think Mr. Becker there has been, yeah.
Well, I think most of the acknowledge the reefer truck is not fixed inside the car. Having said that, there needs to be made one MC case. One MC case is $250,000.
Yeah.
That's 2.5 reefer trucks.
Yeah.
So I'm all for going after the roof, and I know we folks are doing an amazing job. In the meantime, we have these solutions, and so I really applaud people working really hard in the interim to at least support these people moving beyond their things.
So my challenge to everybody now, we know that the city of Seattle allows goats. They license their goats, just like
And
their
miniature
dogs.
cows.
And it's working. They're looking at miniature cows. I want something.
Yeah, we want farm animals. We want cows and goats and sheep and, absolutely. So sheep, cows, pigs, goats, we want it all.
I'm just wondering, it sounds like you've done a lot of consultation, and I'm the council for the town of Port Cardin, and I'm trying to get you challenging to bring
first is that in general, two committees that John and I work on. One is the advisory planning committee, so that's anything land use related. We've actually been taking the food strategy through them as well because it does impact land use. The other one is the social planning advisory committee, who worked on the grant for the truck. So we do have those committees in place, which are a group of community residents. So we've already got a sounding board there to move things forward to council. That's one of the pieces. For public input, additional public input, the food strategy, we literally started off with huge public open houses and workshops to get community input. 65 people came out to the first workshop, which doesn't sound like a lot, but from a planning perspective, it was a good turnout. Having said that, we tried a few different things this year. We actually set up a booth at our fall fair for 3 days. We went out and did a series of open houses. We set up a booth at the Harvest Festival downtown. And so it's not necessarily that one-on-one of talking about all the specifics, but it was the education piece and getting the information out there and letting people know what was going on so we could get it.
Just a quick follow-up. Was it staff or council that coordinated the?
Sorry, I can hardly hear
Was
you.
it staff or the council that kind of led the community, large community?
Staff.
Staff.
And I would also add that I rely on my nonprofit partners, who many of them are in the room today. So I don't necessarily feel the need to go canvass user groups. I will go to the food bank and say, what are your folks telling you? And I'll go to something. So I'll ask the nonprofits who regularly encounter. So that saves me the job of going out. But they get much more accurate feedback and more frequent than we would ever get it. So go to your nonprofit partners and ask them, what are your clients saying? What do you need? What are the needs of the community? They're really good at that. And you don't have to do all that bothersome public council stuff. Yeah.
The trick though is getting creative and trying new things to see where you can garner feedback.
I'm curious why mushrooms are.
Sorry, which?
Why you inhibit why mushrooms? What's involved?
Smell.
Just the smell?
Yeah.
Yeah, and in odor,
I agree. Yeah.
people comment quickly. And if you have something smells in your neighborhood, the complaints come fast and furious. Right?
Mushrooms?
Yeah.
There's about 10,000 different types of mushrooms, and you're referring to one type.
Yeah,
Lots of other
absolutely. And I agree with Rob, what he said earlier about the buffers and how we've separated ourselves from the farming. But when you're working in a community with 90,000 residents, we have to work our way forward slowly.
The cynical planner's perspective is people like farms, but they would like pictures of farms, not actual farms, right? So they want to look out the window at a picture of a farm, not actually live next to one, right? So
there needs to be a cultural social shift.
Yes.
There is.
And there's going to be a reason for it as we continue to pay more money for food.
We get hungry.
Issues, absolutely.
Both North Sandwich and Nanaimo for some really forward-thinking policies that enable the type of activities that all of us who are working in food security, we dream about having, urban agriculture allowed. So my question to both of you is, I'm living in the Cost Valley now, and we see resistance at the city council level to things like urban chickens, growing food commercially in the city. What are some of the drivers that are the language that we can use? Like any tips for people in Mansfield and all of us who kind of run up against the resistance? Like what's the magic?
Again, pushing, just coming in and pushing, I think is key so that council is hearing it. But I think one of the things that worked for the Poultry Collective when they came forward and made a presentation to council is they had their facts with them. So here are some of the things that you might run up into for complaints, and here's how you can address them. So they were really prepared when they went forward to answer any questions council might have.
I specifically looking at the urban agriculture because of the long-term impact that this has. Because I've heard a few times from some of our council members that farming belongs over there, and the city is moving forward is not for that kind of activity. So how do you change that mindset?
So in the North Sandwich example, I was really lucky when I arrived there in 2011 because Mayor Alice Fennell and her council.
Rob, can I just get this side up? And how about over there?
Now it's going to be recorded. I was really lucky in 2011 because Mayor Alice Fennell and her council were embracing this. I didn't have to do any convincing. As a matter of fact, they helped educate me in a big way, and I really appreciate that. So that's in an ideal situation. When it's not in an ideal situation, you have to find a way to make it work for that worldview. So you look, you hear, you listen to the discourse. If there's an interest in sustainability or in resilient communities, then you can start to package it that way. If they're not, well, you're not going to be able to do much. But except for through the grassroots. I mean, it's the grassroots, it's the public, sentiment that gets expressed that ends up in having different elected officials that may be more open to it. So I mean, that's the political process. I think fundamentally it's about community dialogue to keep it going.
Can I add also the secret in cities is 10 people can drive policy change. 10 people who are keen on a thing, who phone their councillors, who show public meetings. A small handful of people can have an enormous impact, and sometimes that's good and sometimes that's bad, right? But nonetheless, if you have a handful of devoted fans who are all over this stuff, and if they're pushing, they become to loom quite large in council's eyes. Oh, everyone wants urban agriculture now. It's really only 10 people, but nonetheless, that effect is really strong in local politics, right? And I'm sure you can comment on that, but if you get 10 noisy people, you can change policy, and that's basically what you need.
And the other side of that is find some staff members. Find some staff members that you can work with and build that education both on their side and yours. What are the concerns? What are the positives? Because they're also working with council.
Speak up.
Absolutely.
Talking about people running for election.
Yeah.
I think we have time for these 2 questions.
John, last week actually Anthony and I were involved in a webinar around the role municipalities play in helping communities. Can you say more about that?
Well, in municipalities, especially smaller municipalities, have struggled a bit with what's their role in things like food banks and community development in general. So small traditional councils will say our job is to build roads and put up street lights and to prevent crime and barking dogs, and so they're very limited mandate. So to convince the local government that their mandate is larger than that they need to be involved in these, sometimes that's an uphill battle and a hard sell job.
Absolutely.
But if you keep at it, eventually, it sinks in that yes, we have a bigger role to play, mainly because our senior governments abandon us in these areas anyhow, so we might as well pick up the slack. So it is a little bit of a tough sell sometimes, but you just have to make the case that really what you're doing is driving the economy of the local region, or you make a case that resonates with those particular folks. So if you have a very conservative council, it's about local economies and about growing the economy. If you have a very progressive council, it's about community development and living in this holistic world where we have healthy food that comes from our healthy land, So my thinking is you find the resonance point, and then that's how you sell a thing. What resonates with that person?
And just to reinforce that point, in Europe, local food production is about economic development.
Absolutely.
That's a drive. It's different from here. It's different things for different people. But so it's a matter of finding out what the priorities and goals are, and then framing the benefits in that context.
And think about those countries where people actually sleep with their pigs in their houses because they have to have them.
Okay, my suggestion, if you want us to change some of these concepts of farming, Google rooftop.
Sorry? That's
Blow
more
your mind with
rooftop.
Absolutely.
what you look like. We're looking at what you think is the farmer's field, is the top of the skyscraper, 50 stories tall. And then every building produced all of the waste heat. And then if you could actually take all the toilet waste and turn it into usable fertilizer, the whole building would be a self-contained food production.
VIU is doing research on the green roof concept at the moment. So if any of you have the opportunity to visit the Cowichan campus, you'll see the green roof project that's going there. And that's very much where we're headed. We want to feed the cafeteria off the roof of the university.
One of the mushrooms, the lost mushroom being grown illegally in Nanaimo, they're all being grown in lots. Traditionally, we grow mushrooms in Europe, so it's just simply mushroom growing is only permitted if done so without use of your IP, shiitakes, and bars. Language. Language is a huge key. I do 2-3 hours a day working with people in Surrey right now. Being under major attack by law enforcement after getting blessing of the Ministry of the Environment and the Sustainability Department of the City of Surrey by Department Hall, we use Google culture, which is simply a hail of blue chips and other materials in our street. Provide growing mediums, some of the staff are using words like illegal landfill, industrial waste. So part of what needs to be shifted, including the legislation, including in manuals, binders that you folks have in your offices, is some of the language. And one classic example is words that were used, is that we were storing industrial waste, that we had a landfill, and that we had an industrial operation. So language is very, very key. When I was on the Bill Good show, as soon as he heard that anything he heard, he just freaked out on me, and then, yeah, just like an atmosphere.
Right.
So language, very important.
I was listening to Wayne Roberts of the Food Policy Council in Ontario and Toronto speak, and Arzina, you asked about what language should you use. He pointed out that about 30% of the trips that you have in the city of Toronto, now that would be different out here, are for food, to get food, to dispose of waste. And what city isn't interested in bringing down those costs? So I think it's really important to add that piece of it.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for participating. I think it's been a really good, lively discussion. Thank you to